an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Wall of Storms, Chapters 3 and 4, Princes and Princesses, and Grand Examination. In these chapters, you thought grad school was hard? Did you? Because I wouldn't know, because I never went to grad school. These exams are fucking brutal. Also, I am weirded out by the audiobook pronouncing Jin Mazzotti's name as Gin. What's that about? Totally unrelated, nevertheless. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks to Kyle, who commissioned this episode. I'm very excited to be getting back into this one because it's been a little bit. And these chapters are a lot of setting things in place for us. Table setting is what I like to call it when I come across this sort of thing. There is a feeling of the tide very slowly turning. And I know that I said this before, how much I just wanted everything that happened with Kuniguru to wind up okay. Because I just like for the happy ending sometimes to just be in place. I just want the piece to be frozen in time forever. And that is just not going to work. People are people. And we, as much as we try and deny it, often love conflict. And I've actually kind of wondered to myself how much the motivation behind conflicts has evolved over the years, because we have gotten to a point in a lot of ways in civilization where the powers in place that are able to initiate wars do not do them because they are trying to, access something for their people. They're doing it for reasons that the people themselves aren't even really aware of. And while I know that's always been true to a degree, there seems like there's even more of a remove now than there used to be in that regard. And I feel like some of that is because we are not fighting for our survival daily because of how much of a surplus of food and technology and, cheap fuel there is. So the motivation for starting conflicts and fights is just inherent, I feel like, in humanity. But the need for it, or at least the pretense of need for it, changes because by where we are in the world and what our history as a person is, having grown up during during a time of strife or during a time of peace. Basically, what I'm talking about are the summer and winter children from Game of Thrones. Summer children are the ones who grew up during the good times and don't really understand what the bad times are at all because they have not had to see it. And I find that concept to be kind of interesting, because there's something to be said for how being alive when there is so much strife and mistrust and destabilized landscapes, either politically or actually physically, it could be trauma or it could simply be the background of your life that is going to change your perception of things and your understanding of the world and your attitude about certain things. And I feel like it's pretty wise in a lot of ways for Ken Liu to start focusing in this book on Kuni's children, because they are going to be a whole other brand of, their generation is the first out of how many years? Because we had Mapidere, then his son, then Mata, and now Kuni. So that's probably at least 2 generations in there, probably, right? from Moppy, because Kuni was a kid when Moppy Dairy was around, and he has had his own kids. And I would argue that some kids, some people that are Kuni's age might have gotten on to having kids sooner than Kuni did, and so they might have grandchildren out there by now. There is going to be such a disconnect between people who grew up during the war times and constant fear of Moppy Dairy either conscripting their relatives to go work on these ridiculous pyramids and fucking tunnels and whatever the fuck else, and people who were always awaiting some kind of raid or, you know, just for a battle to like spill over into their territory, or at the very least, even if they weren't directly affected by the fighting, the borders of their little city-states were being shifted around all the fucking time. So the people who had to live with that sort of constant uncertainty are just going to be of a very different mind than the people who were born after everything was settled and there was a reasonable emperor in place who actually gave a shit about people and knew how to manage a kingdom and genuinely wanted what is best for everyone. And, you know, there's some times where one could say how lucky people are to be born during the calmer times, but there's a lot to be learned during the bad times as well. And they will not have the benefit of that kind of hindsight. They'll have to learn it in other ways, which may or may not be as effective, which may or may not stick with them the same way. And if the stakes aren't as high as they were for other people, might not make the kind of impression that they should. So we'll see. I'm just, you know, because of the way the last book spanned such a huge amount of time, I expect this book, I think Kuni will have to die of old age within this book if we're going to be sticking with the, you know, formula that was set up in the previous one. And in that time, we're going to be watching his kids grow up and finding out how they decide to cope with everything. And they're already very, very different. So I'll just be really interested to see that like progression and how they decide, because that conversation with Jin, and I'm going to continue to call her Jin and not Gin because I don't care for it. There were a couple things that the narrator for the audiobook pronounced in a weird way that really caught me off guard. Kunigaru, he pronounces it Kunigaru. And even just a tiny change of like, you know, which syllable he puts the accent on. I'm just like, what is this? What is that word? He calls at one point the gymnasium, he pronounces it gymnasium with a hard G. And I don't know if that was like a direction that he was given to say it differently because this is supposed to be like, you know, a different world from ours and they're trying to, but I don't see the need for it. It was just distracting and strange. A couple like moments like that. But anyway, okay. So getting into this, and I want to mention this as well. For those of you who are thinking about doing the audiobooks, I do like the narrator. I didn't listen to the first one, so I don't know if it's the same narrator, but I'm assuming it is. They tend to do that. However, there is a weird thing with the setup in the menu. So when Kyle commissions these episodes, he specifically tells me which chapters he wants me to read, because on Kindle books, not all of them have page numbers the normal way that makes it so much easier for me to gauge when I need to stop reading. So Kyle has sort of taken that out of my hands and has figured it out for me and just tells me which chapters to read, which is hugely helpful. So thank you for doing that, Kyle. And in the audiobook, they decided to make what's labeled the first chapter the like prologue. So everything is off by one chapter. So when I saw that he wanted me to read chapters 3 and 4, I pressed chapter 3 and I started listening and I was like, this is weird. This feels really familiar. Like, are we going back over and then I realized that chapter 3 in the audiobook is actually chapter 2 from the actual book. So just warning to you guys, if you feel like following along, that's not going to match up, and just keep an eye on that. So anyway, sorry guys, we're getting all over the place, but we start off this chapter with Master Ruthie, who is the tutor in charge of teaching Kunigaru's children. And he is being chased after by Gia. And the thing is that this guy is completely right in a lot of ways. But also, like, they're fucking children, dude. So anyway, this tutor is really upset with the fact that the royal children, I think they are called the Imperial Children, which I rather like. So I think I'll go with that. The Imperial Children are not taking their studies seriously, are not showing him the respect that he feels he deserves. And they are, in general, sort of running roughshod over everyone. And he feels like everybody's just allowing them to get away with all of this. And as he's like storming around, like ranting about it, because it turns out that they wrote, and I'm kind of like all over the place here. As he's storming around, we get a description of Gia chasing after him. And I need to read this because I had to press the rewind 30 seconds button on my audiobook to be like, did I just hear that right? Since the emperor wasn't holding court today, Gia was dressed in a simple silk robe and wooden slippers that allowed her to run, instead of the formal court robe bedecked with hundreds of jade and coral dirons, the heavy, tall crown of silver and bronze, and those 3-foot-long court shoes that resembled small boats. What? 3-foot-long court shoes? Why? What on earth purpose does that serve? What are you... You know what? I'm Googling this to see if there are, like, court shoes. You know what? It's going to be tennis. Yep, it's tennis. Court shoes, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece. Let's say ancient Japan. I'll just say Japan. We'll go with something that's sort of... No, it just looks like wooden clogs and flip-flops. There's nothing that seems like really comparable. But yeah, I am super curious if this is based on something that's like actually historically accurate. And if it is, please, guys, tell me. Because I was so distracted by the idea of that I couldn't even imagine. And the whole idea of like of holding court requiring you to wear something that prevents you from like moving or talking. Ooh, sorry guys. I don't know if you guys heard that little beep, but I got like a weird notification. That seems like such a bummer that doing your job would require you to be essentially a prisoner of whatever you're wearing. So I always think of myself as somebody who would enjoy doing something like holding court because I love attention and I love getting to judge people. So bring it on. But that sounds like a huge bummer and a drag, and maybe I wouldn't enjoy this at all. But anyway, she's running after Ruthie, who is the tutor, Imperial tutor. And he says, I am afraid I can't possibly be considered a learned man. You'd better seek other able teachers for the princes and princesses. My continued employment would only ruin their education. And she starts to say, well, you need to discipline their minds. And he interrupts, which everybody is just sort of like a little bit horrified by because you just don't do that. And he says, I tried to administer discipline, and look what I've gotten for my troubles. All the princes and princesses are nowhere to be found. And she tries to be like, well, not all of them. Farah. And he's like, oh my God, Farah is 4. Shut the fuck up. You know what I mean. Which, you know what? He's right. And he says, you know, I've tried to give my best to teach the children, but even the most patient man has limits. Running away from their punishment essays was bad enough, but look at this. He dropped the satchel from his shoulder and twisted around to show the Empress the back of his robe. In childish Zindari letters, a couplet was painted on the fabric. I play the zither for the ruminating cow. The cow speaks, moo, 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 moo. Why such knitted brow? Now, of course, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I don't know what this means. But a moment later, Ruthie says, do you think it's funny to be compared to the foolish man in Leroussen's poem who played the zither for cows and then complained about not being understood? No wonder learning has such a hard time taking root in such thin soil. You know what? That's kind of like crossing a little bit of a line there, buddy. I mean, Jesus Christ. I was really surprised that he said that. And Gia ignores it, but like, I mean, I would have to admit that would kind of eat at me. Even after he decides to stay, I might bring it up at one point that he like said something like that. And she tries to be like, well, isn't it a good sign that they're out here quoting Leroussen? Like, it feels like something that most children wouldn't know enough to do. And he loses it and screams, do you think that I should be pleased? And goes off on all of the various things that he has accomplished in his life, and then says to be reduced to being insulted by children. But no, they're unteachable. And all right, listen, here's the thing. And I think that, you know, all of us really need to keep this in mind. Ruthie finally seems to like kind of come to his senses, not because of anybody being able to really talk sense into him, actually, but because he falls for Cooney's bullshit. And that's what's so kind of amazing about Cooney, is that he may not be really being honest with you about why he's saying whatever he's saying, and he may be kind of dancing around the actual point that he is trying to make in hopes that you'll sort of like get there yourself and that you won't be able to detect his hand in leading you down that path. But he manages to get to the heart of matters that it feels like everybody else around him is missing in doing those things, which really indicates somebody who is seeing several steps ahead of everybody else. So what this comes down to is Ruthie is ready to just abandon these kids because they don't obey him. And I would like all of us to really stop and think about our expectations of children and what we thought was important as children. And try to fucking empathize a little bit more. Because I feel like if you are a teacher and that's your job, and you'd say that somebody's children are unteachable, and this is not because that child has, you know, some sort of learning disability or is cognitively impaired or anything like this. It's simply because they're unruly. Maybe you should get a different job. I'm just saying. There's a lot of like, lately in the news, there have been several instances of teachers who have lost their tempers with students and either like struck them, shook them, said really like cruel, terrible, racist things. Or there were like two in which the teacher cut off the child's hair in class as like a method of discipline, which I just have to wonder what that fucking teacher is going to think the result will be when they cut off a child's hair and send them home like that. But these teachers, whenever they behave badly, there will inevitably be people in the comment section who are like, well, were you there? You don't know how kids can be. And it's like, I mean, I'm not trying to claim that I know everything about children. I have worked with kids several times, but I'm not a teacher, and I don't have children of my own, and I don't plan to, because I know that's a bad plan for me. But if you cannot manage a child without resorting to physical violence and or humiliation, and you get angry that they don't want to sit and read ancient fucking poems and bullshit, you have so completely lost touch with what it means to be a child that you shouldn't be doing this job anymore. Like, there is just a point at which you need to recognize what it is that makes the group you're working with particularly difficult, and look at why you're so incompatible and try and adjust what you do. So the fact that Ruthie is over here about to just basically quit in a fit of temper because he is just so frustrated, I'm just like, maybe you all should just let him go. But, you know, that's not on the table for whatever reason. I would have liked a little bit more of like an indicator of why they're so set on holding on to Ruthie, because I would have liked, like, maybe it's just politically it looks bad to be like, oh yeah, their tutor quit because the kids are so undisciplined. I'm sure that would probably look bad for the family, so maybe that's part of it. But part of me did sort of feel like, well, obviously he isn't really like cut out for this. So find somebody who can deal with your kids being children and who understands that if you lock a bunch of kids alone into a room to write an essay, that they probably will not be doing that. These kids are all related, so they wind up going off on some adventure together. But if they were just friends, who knows what would have happened? If they were all like closer to the same age, I feel like things could have gone even more terribly wrong. Kyle says he's a diva. Yeah, that seems right. So this is when Kuni steps in and says, "Oh, Master Ruthie, how you wrong the children. My heart breaks to see them so misunderstood." And he says, "This reminds me of my youth, when I studied under Master Tumo Loing. Why is it that the Guru children are always cursed with being misjudged?" So he turns around this thing because obviously the writing of this little couplet on the back of his robe is meant to be like, you know, an insult to him in that he is, he's being foolish and expecting children to be interested in the complexity of whatever it is that he is trying to teach. That essentially his insistence is like a mental block for him that he needs to get past and understand. They're sort of saying what I'm saying, right? But what Kuni does is he turns it around and says, don't you see that this note is them comparing themselves to the cows? Because we know we are not as smart as you, and we are really sorry that you are wasting all of your knowledge and expertise on trying to teach us when we aren't equal to the greatness of your intellect, is basically how Kuni spins this, which that was almost immediately my thought when I heard. I was like, or they're insulting themselves. So Kuni spinning this, like, one could say that he's really tap dancing here, but it's not that much of a stretch when you really look at it. And everybody around Kuni at this point is, because, you know, he's the emperor, and everybody is immediately jumping on this bandwagon to agree with him in this way that Kuni finds like kind of irritating. They're all like, yes, oh, correct, that's exactly it. They are so humble. What intelligent princes. And like, the whole thing is just a little too much. And he finally has to like motion for everybody to just shut up. And Ruthie starts to be a little bit like more relaxed. Like, he's becoming kind of receptive to this idea. And he asks why, if this were meant to be a real sincere apology, why they would paint this on the back of his robe rather than giving him an actual apology in the moment. And Kuni is like, well, they thought, because you had just finished yelling at them, that if they tried to apologize in that moment, it wasn't going to come across as sincere. You were still heated from being frustrated with them, And you would think that they were just saying whatever they needed to say in order to get you to forgive them and move on. So they decided to plant this in a place that you wouldn't see until you had cooled off a little bit and might be more receptive to it. Now that feels like much more of a stretch. And then Ruthie asks, well, why did they run off? If that was like, if they really had apologized and they were really like hearing what I was trying to teach them and wanted to be better, then they would have gone and written their damn essays and not just tried to flee. And Kuni is attempting to come up with some excuse that feels at all likely when they get interrupted by Rosanna, who is bringing the kids in. Lady Soto and Chatelaine Kryn caught them trying to sneak back into their rooms. They were disguised as commoners. So she brings the kids over, and Kuni has to do one of those things that you try and do with friends when you like you're attempting to cover for somebody or something, and you're like, yeah, so I was just telling him about how excited you are about going to the... And I really love the detail about how his daughter is the one that picks up on it first. Because, and I think that this is going to be like a running theme for a while. Anybody who knows the two of them, and by the two of them, I mean his daughter and Kuni, they are going to be able to recognize how much more like her father she is than her brothers are. And there is going to be, I am positive, a sort of reckoning of people wondering why do we have things set up the way that we do when the female is the one that is obviously better suited to ruling and has a better temperament and a better better judgment and ability to, they wouldn't say manipulate because has too many negative connotations, but they'd say something like somebody who is as excellent with diplomacy is probably what people would say. As her father, we should have her be in charge. And, I'm not saying that this is going to be something that happens immediately, but I bet part of this book is going to cope with people being more open to the idea as they realize how many of the women have been instrumental, because I don't think that's fully appreciated yet. There's something that's like, and I know I've talked about this, so forgive me, guys, if that I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I don't remember what I said last time I talked about this, so I'm bringing it up again. One of the few women who is given respect because of who she is, rather than because of who she's married to, is Jin. The Empress and the royal consort, Rosanna, they're both respected, and I won't say that it's just because they're with Kuni. Like, they are decent women who have talents and are strong, and people have grown to know that. But they would not, I don't think, be in any position of power if they weren't with Kuni. They, like so many women in history, have had to access power via the back door. They've had to sneak in through the service corridors in order to get anywhere near power, because direct access is closed to them. So marriage is the most usual means of getting there. And Jin has been able to access it from the front because of what it is she can do in terms of fighting. And this is something that I have always been aware of, but never really was able to put words to until the past 3 or 4 years. The desire to create, quote, strong female characters, by having those strong female characters embody masculine traits. So rather than having these women characters be respected because of skills that they have that fall outside of what one would consider to, for example, in Game of Thrones, and I'm not trying to talk about the show quite as much, but I'll be using the show as a shortcut for those of you who haven't read the books to understand what I mean. It's much more true within the books. The show kind of botched it, but the vibe is still there. Sansa and Arya are very different types of women. Arya is interested in breaking all societal norms by fighting and solving problems via fights and violence and becoming an excellent swordswoman and generally just like fitting into one of the few, what's the word I want? Pigeonholes that was respected in that era. Somebody who has physical prowess was somebody that everybody sort of gave extra credibility and, and whatnot. And granted, Arya was very good at what she did, but Sansa is not the type of girl that Arya is. And a lot of people hated Sansa because they found her to be really dull because she didn't stand up for herself the way that Arya would have. And she didn't handle her problems the way that Arya would have. But the thing is that not everybody can or should be physically dominant. That's not a good way for the world to be. And trying to solve everything that way is simply not how you get things done. And Sansa's strength did not lie in fighting, just the way that Arya's strength did not lie in doing, fucking needlework. And it took a while for Sansa to really understand that the best way for her to defend herself was politically, which takes a lot more finesse, a lot more patience, and a lot more of, apparently, in the eyes of people around you, eating shit because you're biding your time for when you can actually deal with an issue later on down the road. And that sort of thing is how so many women had to survive and had to make their ways in the world, by being sly, by keeping their eyes open, collecting information, learning how to manipulate the egos of the men in power around them so that they could get things done, and keeping their actual agendas to themselves. That was and still is, in many cases, one of the most surefire ways for women to succeed and get ahead. And the fact that we always, over the past 10 years, tend to talk about, quote, strong female characters as women who are physically strong and capable, and we don't really look at women who are traditionally feminine but still manage their shit in the same way, is born right out of misogyny. So, because what it is we don't respect femininity. The surest way to try and humiliate a man, and this is what Kuni points out, is to insinuate that he is behaving like a woman, that he is being weak in specifically a way that you associate with a woman's attitude or place in the world. And Jin, because of this society, which is still very patriarchal, is afforded a kind of respect because she has proven herself to be acceptably masculine, because she is a good fighter and tactician and manages to do something that men already respect. But the kinds of things that women do that are much more subtle, that are an adaptation of them living in a society that has tried to strip their power away every chance they get, that kind of admiration is simply not there. That kind of respect is not really there. So I am really hoping that what's going to happen with Kuni's daughter is that she is going to start to be able to chip away at that a little bit. And that eventually, because she makes a really good point later on, they're arguing with Jin about trying to get the pass for the woman who lost hers that was in the pub. They are trying to get one for her. And Jin has one that she can, like, bestow on someone that she finds worthy. And the way this goes is really interesting. So I'm going to... The whole thing with Kuni and Ruthie winds up getting wrapped up. Kuni, like, tricks Ruthie into getting them out of the punishment that he had supposedly been going to inflict on them, even though he definitely wasn't going to do that. And there's an interesting moment at the end where Kuni says, still, Fyro's antics reminded me a lot of myself. Risana smiled. A momentary frown flickered across Gia's face, but soon it was again as placid and regal as before. Now, I said Fyro, but I'm going to say Firo. I think that is supposed to be. Firo is his son by Risana. And Gia, at the end of the last book, was really concerned that they were not going to be putting one of her children on the throne, that it was going to wind up being one of Risana's kids. And him saying that, being like, wow, this kid really in particular reminds me of myself, is another nail in that coffin I think she's hearing. But we go over to the kids, and they are talking about, first of all, their little sister throwing a tantrum because they didn't take her with them. And they're talking about Zomi, which is the woman who lost her pass. Inspired by the courage of the Kashima, and though this wasn't said, also out of a sense of gratitude for her vigorous defense of the honor of their father, the children had promised to help Zomi get into the examination hall despite the loss of her pass. Zomi had thanked them for their concern, but she clearly had not taken seriously the promise the three children in a pub, even if they sounded like they came from a wealthy family. She gave them the address of her hostel only reluctantly, and emphasized that she didn't have time to play games. Which, that's such a good point that it didn't really even, like, occur to me that these kids are out here dressed like commoners, and they don't have any way to prove who they are. There's no guards with them. There's nobody who's going to vouch for them. It's not like there's tabloids out there with all of their photos in there, you know? So she has no reason to think that they have any sort of ability to help her. And very practically decides to not really get her hopes up. And, oh, you know what? They don't even try and tell her who they are, which probably was smart. But yeah, she just doesn't think that they're going to be able to pull this off. Why don't we just go directly to Da and ask him to make an exception? Thera shook her head. He can't be seen as intervening on behalf of any candidate to bend the rules for any reason. Can't we just ask Da to send an airship to take her back to Dasu and get them to write a new pass? First of all, Uncle Kato isn't in Dasu. And you know he lets his regent run everything in Dasu, so he wouldn't even know who Zomi is. So they continue talking about all of this stuff. Can we talk to Uncle Rin? He's in charge of security at the examination hall, and he's good about playing along with us, but the passes are collected along with the final answers from all the test takers and turned in to the judges in matched sets. Getting Zomi into the hall isn't enough. We also have to give her a real pass. Even the Farsight secretary has no authority to make examination passes. And then they talk about forging a pass, and this is really interesting. Do you think Uncle Rin's security procedures are just for show? He cuts the passes out of a single sheet of paper with golden threads embedded at the paper mill, so that the pattern on each one is unique, and then he distributes the blank passes to all the provinces and fiefs by the projected number of Kashima. Any passes that are unused are sent back. At the end of the examination, he puts all the used and unused passes together like a big puzzle by matching their golden threads, and any forged pass will stick out like a sore thumb because it won't fit. Wow. Okay, I guess that's one way of doing it. if you don't have a counterfeit pen that you can just run over it to make sure that it's the thing that it's supposed to be. So at this point, Timu is asking why it is that Thera knows so much about this, and she confesses that she has wanted to take the examination. And she has to explain to them, guys, you are both going to be able to go and actually do interesting shit and have an effect on the world, but I'm a girl and they're just going to make sure I'm married well. And that's it. I'm not allowed to take the test. And that means like my future is pretty much completely dependent on a dude. And, when they are like, but it's a lot of work, why would you even want to? She's like, you guys don't need to have qualifications because you're father's sons. So they'll put you in a position of actually like operating within the government, even without any sort of training, because you're his sons. The end. That's all it takes. But for me, they aren't going to like make exceptions for things. And if they did, I would know that the only reason anybody is taking it seriously is because I'm his daughter and people don't want to be seen snubbing me. But they won't be taking it seriously like in their hearts. They will think that I am where I am because of nepotism and that I just like leaned on daddy to give me a present, and they won't believe that I actually deserve to be here or know what I'm talking about. And I thought that that was a really interesting point as well. The idea that like, even when women, you know, are able to accomplish something, and this is so true, oftentimes their accomplishments are discounted. And I don't know how many of you have seen this sort of thing in action, but one of the most frequent things, I don't know what that sound is. Do you guys hear that? It sounds like there's a lawnmower running right outside my window. One of the most frequent methods of robbing a woman of the credit she is due is insinuating that she got where she is by sleeping with somebody. And it works like a charm. The moment that you put that into people's heads, even if they don't really believe it, there's always going to be that whisper of doubt. And it just... It works so effectively that it's frankly startling, and you can see it all the time with all kinds of female celebrities. People just being like, well, she's just married to so-and-so, and that's the only reason we even know who she is. She's not anything. And it's always people who fucking, you know, are living in their parents' basement and haven't got 2 cents to rub together that are trying to act like they can pass judgment on this woman's accomplishments. And it's really something. So yeah, I love the fact that his daughter, is already so aware of the way the world works and knows that she is going to have to fight for every little bit of credit and opportunity that is afforded her. And, yeah, I just appreciate her getting to talk to Jin about this later, because nobody knows better than Jin. And she makes her case, and it clearly, like, gets through. Jin is like, yeah, this all sounds very familiar. So here it is. Firo and I will write the essay ourselves. Maybe the apology started as just another prank, but I do feel bad about what we did to Master Ruthie. He really does want the best for us. He didn't even want us punished more than we deserved. Well, maybe he's not that bad, Firo said. And I really like this, that the kids are able to get past the fact that they're just irritated with this guy in the moment and see that he's actually like trying his best, you know? So when Jin comes and talks to them about this, she's like, we get a little bit more of the, more of a picture of exactly how things work with these exams. She had arrived at the Imperial Palace just that day. She didn't visit the capital often, as administering Gejira and overseeing the affairs of the Empire's scattered but vast military kept her busy. but the first grand examination of the Reign of Four Placid Seas was a special occasion, and she had high hopes for a few of Gejira's scholars to distinguish themselves. You've come to recruit me as your co-conspirator because you want me to shield you from your father's rage when your silly scheme blows up. Do you think you can outwit me? Remember, children, I knew you when you were still making dumplings out of mud and waving willow branches as swords. As soon as you loosen your belt, I know the color of your shit. The children giggled. This was one of the reasons they liked Auntie Jin. She never put on airs with them and spoke to them as colorfully as she would to her soldiers. Now in her 30s, Jin Mizotti still kept her hair closely cropped, and her compact body, despite her life as a queen, remained muscular and nimble, like a craggy reef standing against the sea. And she is particularly soft on Firo. It says this was only in part because Firo was bright and had always begged her for stories about the war. In truth, Jin had a better rapport with consort Rizana than Kuni's other wives. And I found that interesting, his wives. I was just like, how many are there? During the time of Kuni's rise, Jia was held by the hegemon as a hostage, while Rizana rode by Kuni's side, and Jin had come to respect her as an advisor to the king. Secretly, she hoped that Kuni would designate Firo the crown prince. It's true that I still have a few extra passes, but the rules say they're meant for specific uses, such as to replace the lost pass of another test taker from Gejira, not to get someone from Dasu into the examination hall. And they try and be like, listen, she might not be from Gejira, but it's a lost pass. Like, you know, it was... When she did it, she was defending Dad's honor and she was defending the innocent. And Jin is like, yes, that's fair. But also when you do things that are for the greater good, that doesn't mean they come without any sort of price. Just because it's the right thing to do doesn't mean there's no consequences for doing it. And they argue about like, you know, well, you know, she'd have to wait another 5 years in order to take the test again. And Jin hears all of these arguments and is like, yes, but maybe that's what has to happen. And there's this moment that I thought was really interesting where one of them asks, I think it's, is it Thera? Yeah. Thera asks, are you worried she'll do better than the scholars of Gejira? Basically sort of trying to push her into proving that it's not coming from like a lack of faith in her own people, which is pretty good. And Jin even points it out and was like, you're getting better at manipulation, but I can still see what's happening. And then Thera says, would you have been happy if Prime Minister Kogo Yelu had not recommended you to my father back on Dasu, but instead told you to wait patiently to distinguish yourself in time? And Jin gets a little irritated by this, but it's the same fucking thing. Like, it really is. And the fact that she gets so irritated by it, to me, is proof that Thera has made a hell of a good point. And then Firo says, are you scared of the Empress? And Jin doesn't seem to get what he means right away. And Firo says, I heard the Empress tell Prime Minister Yelu that she wanted him to administer this examination with extra fairness and adhere strictly to the rules. She told him, too many nobles think they can get their friends' children a pass into the examination hall with effusive recommendation letters. You must ensure the results are just. She wrote an angry letter to Marquess Yemu because he gave one of his passes to his nephew, who didn't score as well as some of the other candidates, and the Marquess had to apologize. What did the Emperor say about this? Firo scrunched up his brows. I don't think Da said anything. He didn't even offer Yemu a chance to explain himself? Firo and Thera shook their heads. So, that's kind of a big deal. They're over here talking about Kogo, right? And Kogo has been... It's at the end of the last book where Kogo, like, pretends to be, like, less smart about money laundering than he actually is in order to sort of, like, make himself seem less of a threat to Kuni. I feel like that was him, right? And the way that this goes implies that Kuni is letting Gia have a lot more like power without checking it and without necessarily putting forth the checks and balances that used to be one of his hallmarks, which was, you know, he always allowed people to try and paint a full picture for him, to argue their side and explain any mitigating circumstances, because he understood that every individual situation has its own particular, you know, solution. And the fact that he let her sort of shame a person for doing something without actually asking to hear their side is unlike him, and seems like he's giving her a little bit more power than she used to have. He's not necessarily like questioning the decisions that she's making. Does the Empress know about this friend of yours? Don't lie. No, Mother wouldn't understand. And Jin finally is like, why are you so obsessed with this? And Thera admits it. You know, I want to do what this girl is trying to do, and I'll never get the opportunity. The least I can do is make sure she gets her chance that she has like trained for and fought for. And I can't get a pass no matter how hard I try, you know, like I am living vicariously through her in a way. Even if Father gave me an official position, the scholars would protest it is unseemly for a princess to administer, and everyone will whisper that it's only because I'm his daughter. And he says, or she says, Jin is like, well, there are other ways of exerting influence. Haven't you studied Confucius' precepts? And she interrupts and just says, Confucius is an ass, which I feel like that's true. Most ancient philosophers were. Like, let's be honest. And Jin says, sometimes I wonder if you're not unlucky to come of age in a time of peace. Many of the rules that the sages tell us are indispensable get suspended in a time of war, which I thought was really a good point. And it never occurred to me how much opportunity there is for women during wars. Like the number of women who were able to, for example, start playing professional sports because men were abroad and they had to be brought in to play baseball, or women who were able to join the Air Force, or, you know, all sorts of different things that had previously been closed to them because they started to realize we should just, you know, take advantage of everybody we can. So she gives them the pass and, you know, caves to their demands, and I really appreciated it. Meanwhile, in the background, Luan, her lover that we all know and love, who had been the one that tried to kill Mapidere, he is listening, and he comes out after the kids leave, and it's just like, that doesn't seem like a good mood or a good move. And Jin is like, I am trying to do what somebody did for me at one point. Give a woman a chance to get ahead. And he's like, this is going to come back to bite you in the ass. Like, I know that you say this, and it sounds really convincing on the surface, but it's about more than that, and you know it. And he says, you are suspecting that my warning to you 5 years ago was right, and you're now trying to test whether Kuni's faith in you still holds as Gia is lining up the pieces for her son. Seems right. There's no reason it can't be both things, to be honest. Pumayemu's contributions, or not Kogo. Sorry, I said Kogo earlier. Pumayemu's contributions were also great, but Kuni didn't even intervene to give him a chance to save face when Gia humiliated him. So, yeah, what is that about? Is it about him trying to trust his wife, or is it about him trusting everyone else less? You know, I don't know. So that's the end of that chapter, and I only have like 6 minutes left to get through all of chapter 4. But honestly, chapter 4 is just kind of a set piece. There's not even all that much to talk about. We just get to find out exactly how grueling the examinations are. So it's this huge, huge building with all of these different desks that are inside of like kind of booths a little bit. Like they're protected so that people can't cheat off of one another, really. And there is a like sort of crow's nest in the middle that they can sit in. All of the examiners, they can watch the people who are taking the exam and make sure that they're not cheating. And there's even like a walkway around the outside of it so that they can patrol and look down. And let's see, as the sun rose, Duke Rin Koda looked over to Kogo Yelu, Prime Minister, who sat next to him on the central platform. These two seem to be like it's a weird moment because Rin says to him, "Did you ever think that we would be here?" And Kogo is like, I think we should think about the future instead of the past, which felt like a rebuke a little bit. And Rin seems to be a little embarrassed that he said something. And I really didn't think it was that big a deal. Like, I don't know why Kogo responds the way that he does. And I don't know why Rin is so embarrassed. But maybe there's something else going on there that I'm just not quite picking up on. So then we get all of the Kashima who are arriving to take their exams. And we get to hear about all of the different places that they're coming from and what tends to be the focus of their studies from all of these different areas. And, you know, some of them are really into like learning about astronomy. Some of them it's literature. Some of them it's like biology and all of the oceans as well, marine biology. Finally, every 5 years, and this would be the first time since the founding of the Dandelion Dynasty, the Kashima of each province and fief gathered at the regional capital and were selected to participate in the grand examination. Since each fief or province was allocated only a limited number of passes, the governor or king or duke or marquess would have to pick the attendees based on their test scores, character, recommendations, presentation, and a host of other factors. All of them had been preparing for this moment for years, some for the entirety of their lives. Some had passed the provincial examinations on their first try. Others had tried multiple times. And then, as the rebellion interrupted all examinations, did not get another chance until their hair had turned white. Their journeys had been long and arduous. And the dreams of entire families hung on them. So, no pressure. Like, Jesus Christ, you know? Nobles who had won their titles by sword and horse hoped their descendants would add honor to those titles with writing knife and brush. Merchants who had amassed vast fortunes sought the cloak of respectability made possible only by learned offspring in imperial service. Fathers who had failed in their own pursuit of glory desired to see those dreams redeemed by their sons. Clans who hoped to leap out of obscurity pooled their resources to support a single brilliant child. Many had paid expensive tutors who claimed to know the secret of writing the perfect essay, and even more had paid charlatans who sold crib sheets and cram notes that were as expensive as they were useless. Kyle just wrote in the comments, "Welcome to the fantasy SATs." This is so much worse than the SATs. This is like if you took the SATs and combined it with writing your thesis and boiled it down to 3 days. You were meant to write your whole graduate program thesis in 3 days. And they didn't tell you like what it was going to be on beforehand. It's just so intense. I mean, everything in these books is dialed up to 11, you know. But they are super strict. Like, nobody's able to bring their own writing instruments. Nobody's able to bring good luck charms. They're searched before they go in to make sure that they're not like holding anything on them that could be used for cheating, like the crib sheets and whatever. And for the next 3 days, your stall will be your home. You will eat in it, sleep in it, and use the chamber pot you find inside. If you must leave for any reason, you forfeit your place. Because we cannot permit the possibility of any outside contact. You will find in your stall a scroll of fresh silk as well as scratch paper, brushes, ink, wax, and a writing knife. Your final composition must fit inside the wooden box in the upper right-hand corner of the desk with the cover closed. So plan your logograms carefully. Food will be brought to you 3 times a day, and 2 candles are provided for illumination at night. Do not try to communicate with others by tapping walls, yada, yada, yada. You have until sundown on the 3rd day to complete your answer. When I call time, you must already have the final composition inside the box ready to be handed in. Do not try to beg for an extension. So, yeah, this is a very, very, very intense deal. I wonder if there are examinations like this where you are sequestered for several days. Part of it sounds like, obviously the pressure would drive me nuts, but part of me is also like, that sounds like it would be kind of rad. And so we get I'll have to wrap this up pretty quickly, but we get the, all of the different personalities, a short description of how everybody copes with this. And that there's one poor kid who writes really fast, and he starts to copy his finished essay from the scratch paper onto the silk that they use with the wax because of the logograms, which Kyle, if you know anything about exactly how this writing system in this works, and if there's something comparable in the real world, please let me know, because I'm super curious about what all of these tools would actually look like. But he realizes, after he has started to transfer it to the silk, that there's a huge gaping hole in his argument, and he will have to go back and take some of the wax off of the silk. But doing that will kind of ruin the presentation of it all. And if he leaves it in place, the argument's fucked up and flawed. So it says, seeing years of effort wasted due to a bout of impatience was too much for him to bear, and he began to scream and cut himself with the writing knife. And it turns out that they're totally ready for this to happen. They have people in place that escort him out and doctors to examine him. They know that there are going to be people who crack like this. And eventually there are all these little things that people start to do to try and make things last a little bit more. They are adding coconut water that they're served with their dinners to the ink to make it last longer. Some of them are doing all-nighters and are not sleeping at all. And it turns out to be kind of a bad move, because then they wind up falling asleep later and sleeping right through and not being able to actually finish. And some of them are making sure that they have got enough wax measured out, which is just the idea of running out of supplies also makes me so anxious. Some heated the metal spoons that came with their bowls of soup and rubbed them against the other sides of the silk to gently soften misplaced logograms so that they might be pried off without damaging the surface. And they're all looking at this, and at one point they're asking, the proctors come and ask Rin and Kogo, should we penalize them for this? And they're both like, you know what? No, I don't think this counts as cheating. And I think Kuni would actually be kind of impressed with what they're doing, which they are correct. And finally, we get to the end. Some of them are just really about to totally lose it. And Zomi is there and says, I have done the best I could, teacher, as she closed the cover of her box. The rest is up to chance. She wished her teacher were still around so that she could ask him about the decision she had made on the way to Pan, the secret that she hoped would not ruin all she accomplished. So she prayed to both Lutho, the god of calculation and careful planning, and Tazu, the god of pure randomness, as her teacher had taught her to do. I love that. I love that. I want to pray to both of them as well. That seems smart. Just cover your bases. You know what I'm saying? All right. Well, I am over time, so I'm going to wrap this really quickly. But thank you, Kyle, for commissioning another one. I'm happy to be back. And I hope that you guys are enjoying this coverage. And I will be seeing you again soon, hopefully, with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.